The New Babylon, Chapter 7. Kevin walked back into the observation room where John and Pastor Rubens were watching the interview. "He's definitely alone," announced Kevin. The other two men nodded in agreement. John Allen asked, "What do we do with him?" Kevin looked at Isaac and asked, "What do you think, Pastor?" Isaac Rubens stood frozen in thought for a brief moment. He looked at Kevin solemnly. "I would like us to consider taking him in." Kevin looked down at the floor. John continued to look at his friend, saying nothing. Kevin looked back up at Pastor Rubens. "Isaac, I'm not sure that's a good idea. We can't assimilate every stray that comes along into the tribe. Our resources are limited. We already have a full load on us. I say we just give him a kit, read him the riot act, and send him on his way." The room was silent. A kit was a dollar store backpack with some very bare essentials in it. It contained, among other things, a 2-day supply of food and water, mostly quick calories that required little or no preparation, as well as a small Ziploc baggie filled with Vaseline-soaked cotton balls and a ferro rod. It also had a very basic first aid kit and a few other dollar store items that would be useful for survival. "This young man is just a kid," Pastor Rubens said sternly. "We can't just send him away unprepared." Kevin raised his voice. "It's not my problem that he's unprepared. It's not our problem, unless you insist on making it our problem." The conversation started to get heated. John Allen stepped forward. "Gentlemen, this needs to go before the council. The three of us are not going to make this call. We need to have a consensus." Kevin and Isaac looked at each other and nodded in agreement. Pastor Rubens put his hand on Kevin's shoulder. "Kevin, I understand where you're coming from. Just remember who we are, who you are. There but for the grace of God go I, or go you, or go any of us for that matter. We don't know how this young man came to be alone in this current wilderness. We need to have compassion. We need to love our neighbor as ourselves. That wasn't a suggestion, gentlemen. It was a commandment from God himself. What should we do with that?" The room grew quiet. Kevin looked down at the floor. John Allen looked at Kevin, then at Isaac. "We aren't going to resolve this here. Let's call the council to order," he said. He looked at Pastor Rubens. He nodded. Kevin nodded. In the dank, dimly lit detention room in the basement, the young man sat, cold and alone. A young woman, one of the food ministry workers, knocked softly on the door before entering. "Hello," she said. "I'm here with some soup and a sandwich. You must be hungry." She set the plate down on the table in front of him. He looked at the food, then at the young woman. Her smile was soft and warm. Sweetly and kindly she said to him, "It's okay. Eat up. It's not much, but it's hot. And there's plenty more where that came from." The young man, just a boy really, took the sandwich off the plate and devoured it in 3 large bites, chewing frantically. Then he grabbed the bowl of soup and started to eat it, equally as enthusiastically. "Hey, slow down, bud. It's not a race. Take your time. Enjoy it." Again she smiled at him. The smile came not only from her face, not only from her soft, warm eyes and her mouth, but from her heart and her soul as well. He felt the warmth from inside her radiate out and onto him. It seemed to fill the whole room. It warmed him. He managed to smile back at her, catching himself at first. Then she broadened her smile, and he could not hold back. He beamed from ear to ear. "What's your name?" she asked him. The smile disappeared from his face. He looked suspiciously around the room, stopping his gaze at the camera that hung from the corner of the wall. She looked up at it too. "Oh, don't worry," she said. "I was just wondering. They aren't listening. Besides, even if they were, it's okay. Really, it is. They are really nice people here. My mom and I lived in the neighborhood when things were, when things were working. My mom, she died a few months back. I was alone in our apartment down the street. When I ate the last bit of food we had, I had no choice but to leave on my own. That man, Kevin, the one who brought you in, he picked me up wandering around looking for food. I've been here ever since. They treat me real good. I work in the kitchen and food pantry, helping the older women do stuff there. Maybe you could stay here too." The boy looked up at her. He smiled again and looked at the empty soup bowl. "Do you want to have some more?" she asked. He nodded to her and she picked up the bowl. She said, "We can have as much soup as we want here. We only get one sandwich at lunch 'cause bread and peanut butter and stuff is limited. But we always get to have as much soup as we want." She opened the door and walked out of the room. "Sebastian," the boy blurted out. She looked back at him, confused. "My name," he said. "It's Sebastian." "I'll be right back, Sebastian. My name is Francine. Everyone calls me Fran or Franny," she said, closing the door behind her. It was clear that the boy posed no threat. It was equally clear that Kevin realized it as well. Otherwise, he would have not allowed Francine to bring the food back to him unaccompanied. Upstairs, in what used to be the choir loft, the council sat around a long oak table. The council was made up of 7 members of the church: Pastor, Kevin, and John Allen, as well as 4 other members of the deacons and trustee board. They were discussing what to do with the young man that they caught stealing veggies from in the rooftop greenhouse. Pastor repeated his position to the council. He spoke of the need to consider the biblical command to love thy neighbor as thyself. He went through his whole dissertation on his position from a biblical standpoint and urged the council to consider strongly who and what we were, who and what we wanted to be, or more prudently, who or what we did not want to become. He finished with this statement: "What if this young man were your son? What if he was left alone after you got killed or died trying to feed and protect him? What would you want us to do when we came upon him? Please consider these points carefully, gentlemen." Then he looked at John Allen, who announced that he was largely in agreement, and turned the floor over to Kevin. Kevin sat silent for a long moment. "Gentlemen, most of you know where I stand. This young man was caught stealing food. I don't have to remind any of you the seriousness of that, or the consequences for it. Consequences, by the way, that we all agreed upon when setting up the structure for this community." John Allen interrupted. "Kevin, it's a little different in this case. He's just a boy." Kevin raised his voice. "John, it's not different. He's old enough to steal food. He's old enough to know right from wrong. This is not a child we're talking about. We cannot let anyone who has a notion to walk in here and take from us. Our resources are finite." Then Kevin opened a folder with papers in it, passed one to each member. "This is a current inventory of all our food stores, gentlemen." Then he passed out a second sheet. "This represents our projected harvest from the rooftop gardens, providing for a 10% loss, which we consider to be reasonable. Some lettuces and other items can be grown into the fall in cooler weather. With that and the season extension we project from the greenhouses, this bottom section on the page is our yields. Again, it's projected, but could vary. If anything happens or goes wrong, it can all go to crap in an instant. Then he slid a third paper to the group. This is a current list of everybody we're responsible for feeding. We have had and plan on maintaining an open invitation to all the people who had homes on the block prior to the collapse to join us. We project that every neighbor who has not already joined us will do so by the start of winter. Gentlemen, that number will increase to the number on the far right column when that happens. Each member looked down at the papers before them. They all knew that the logistics of feeding the group was complex, but now to have it laid out before them in print was sobering to say the least. "So, what is it that you propose we do, Kevin?" asked one of the deacons. "I propose we follow protocol, that's all. The protocol that we ourselves initiated when we wrote the charter for this community. Nothing more, nothing less." The men all looked around at each other. The deacon asked, "What is the protocol for that? I'm sorry, I don't remember. It was a while ago when we wrote it." Kevin began to speak when John Allen interrupted. "We give the kid a kit, read him the riot act, and cut him loose," stressing highly that he never return. Kevin nodded. Pastor looked down at the table before him. One of the trustees asked, "And if he does return?" "We have protocol for that too," Kevin responded. Then the trustee just looked at him, then at Pastor. Pastor knew what the protocol was, but he was going to make Kevin say it out loud. He looked over at Kevin, who just hung his head. "If he comes back and tries to steal again, we give it to Overwatch." The trustee looked up at Pastor. "Give it to Overwatch? What does that mean?" Kevin looked around the room. "Cowards," he thought to himself. "They're all going to make me say it. It means that my man in the steeple, who has a full view of all three roofs, fixes it so that he never steals from us again." The trustee, still a little confused, looked around the table at the council members. John Allen spoke up, addressing the trustee. "It means we murder the kid." Kevin slammed his fist down on the table, and the room fell silent for a brief moment. "The time to have this debate was when we were writing the charter, gentlemen, not now. We voted these protocols in place unanimously, if I remember correctly. You boys do what you want to do. You all know how I feel, and you know what my vote is." Kevin turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. He paced for a while in the corridor before sitting down on the floor, back to the wall. He put his head in his hands and just sat. Francine came up the stairs with a plate of sandwiches, lunch for the council. She saw Kevin and stopped to talk to him. "Sir, are you okay?" she asked. Kevin, looking up at her, responded, "Yes, Franny, I'm fine. You have lunch for the council? I'm sure they'll be happy to see you, sweetheart." Everyone was always happy when they encountered Francine. She had that personality which just brought that out in everyone. She held the plate down for Kevin to take a sandwich. He just waved it away and said, "I'm not hungry, sweetheart. Thanks anyway." She smiled and asked him, "Well, then, can I give your sandwich to Sebastian? He's really hungry." Kevin looked up at her. "Sebastian? Who's that, honey?" She answered, "That's the boy you guys brought in before. He's really nice, but he's scared. Is he going to stay with us?" Kevin looked down at the floor. With tears welling up in his eyes, he answered, "I don't know, honey. I don't know."